Miffy Maximilian is the spiritual program coordinator at the Langre Tampa Center in Brisbane, Australia. And I'll read this short bio, which is she's an FPMT registered teacher. Miffy was brought up as a Buddhist and had the great good fortune to play with Lama Yeshe as a child. His hook of compassion sustained her through the many rebellious stages of growing up. She took refuge with Lama Yeshe at age 10 and did her first Lam Rim in Nyung, I don't know if I pronounced it right, Miffy, Nyungne, with Lama Zopa at age 16. She left behind a thriving hot culture and costume business to help her mother, who founded Langre Tapa Center when she became sick with cancer. So Miffy packed her bags for 2 weeks and she ended up continuing her mother's work and her life's work running the program. She's still here, the SPC teaching classes, leading pujas with great enthusiasm and joy over 20 years later. And we're so fortunate to have her and her wonderful style. And I love her slide shares. She makes the greatest slide shares and they are in the materials link. So I'll post those in a bit, but you can also reference those throughout this 5-week series. Thank you.
Oh, look, thank you so much, Mary. That's just fantastic. So yeah, careful if you've got a 2-week plan, it could turn into a 2-decade plan. It's quite possible. So yeah, we're going to embark on this wonderful 5-week adventure together, becoming your best self. So this is it's a course that's relevant for whether you're Buddhist or not, whether you're religious or not, because it's based on Buddhist psychology. And so that's a universal psychology. It doesn't depend on belief and can be extremely helpful for us. So let's have a look. I like to start with the big questions. And so the big question is, well, what's the meaning of life? And no doubt many of us have had that question percolate through our mind many times, probably from when you were a small child. What's it all about? What's the purpose of everything? And apparently, quite a few years ago now, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was touring in America, and they must have stopped at some place in between towns and ended up in a diner. So this must have been early on, like in the 80s or so. And so His Holiness and the whole entourage and everybody there. And so the waitress comes up with the coffee pot and says, oh, look, you know, I've always been meaning to ask you, what's the meaning of life? You know, in 2 short sentences or less, basically. So wonderfully, His Holiness said, what's the meaning of life? It's to be happy and to be useful. So isn't that wonderful? I mean, His Holiness, so to the point, so effortlessly clear. So I'm going to start with that, with His Holiness's quote. To be happy and to be useful. And that's what this course is going to be about. How to actually become happy, how to bring forth all of our innate good qualities. So we kind of sometimes get it back to front where we just want the happiness and then we'll think we'll become a good person, but actually bringing forth our innate good qualities and growing them and stabilizing them is one of the causes for happiness. And if we want to be happy, it's not something that we can get. It's something that we've got to cultivate. It's something that we grow within. And also becoming your best self means, because we are embodied beings in a relative existence, being able to discover an authentic way through our life that's authentic to our current psychological makeup, our circumstances, our hopes and dreams and wishes, our karmic inheritance. Because if we're going against the grain, we'll always be at disease with ourselves. So what we'll have a look at in the course over the 5 weeks, it's like life, the universe, and everything in 5 weeks. So first off, today we're going to identify, well, what exactly is happiness? Because clearly it's something that we all want. It's not through lack of trying, is it? And yet it's so elusive. So why? There's got to be a missing piece to the puzzle here. Then we're going to have a look at what it is that distracts us from our goals, what hampers our happiness, distracts us from actually embodying our values, the things that we care about. So this will be a class on what is known as the 8 worldly dharmas, or the 8 worldly concerns, which are these inner saboteurs, and how to guard against them so that we do have an authentic way through our life. How to be ambitious without it being a negative thing, for instance. Then we'll have a look at, on the 3rd class, investing in your good qualities. So from Buddhist point of view, this is the 3 higher trainings: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. But these 3 higher trainings are essential for anything in life. So they're the gift that keeps on giving all the way through. And they are skills that we've got to develop. They don't necessarily come easily, but we can learn them, just like we can learn to read and we can learn to drive. So we can learn these as well. We'll have a look at the hidden wisdom in depression and anxiety, because Buddhism has some very radical cures and radical insights to our common everyday malaise of depression and anxiety, which is becoming more and more rife in the world, especially in more affluent cultures. And so instead of trying to push it down and make it shut up and go away, there is hidden wisdom in there. And unless we listen to that, our anxiety and depression will keep coming back. And finally, how to deconstruct our negative habit patterns. So we have wonderful resources in modern day neuroscience of how physically our brain works, and we have incredible insights from the Buddha, how psychologically our brain works. And of course, because they're both relative truths, they're in parallel. So I'm going to have a look from both sides of the coin, the Western side and the Buddhist psychology side, and see how they fit in together. The Western side is very good at explaining what's wrong with us. Buddhist psychology is very good at showing what we can do about it. So there is a way that we can not just force our negative habits into submission, but actually deconstruct them, undo them, so that they are no longer there, so they no longer haunt us. With these courses on balancing emotions, there is a big difference between the course being interesting and the course being life-changing. And the difference is whether you do the reflection sheets or not. So I'm going to give you a guarantee and a disclaimer. So the disclaimer is that this course is an addition to what you're already doing. So if you're already doing meditation, keep doing it. If you're already on medication, keep taking it. If you're already in therapy, keep going, and then add this course in. It's not a substitute for all of those things. It's just another string in your bow, I suppose. The guarantee is that, and you don't get many guarantees in life, but the guarantee is that if you just do the homework, which is just filling in a few lines, I've made them purposefully only 2 or 3, not great big pages. But if you just get that inner dialogue going, question and answer in your own mind, and writing it down, a very simple form of journaling, just by that minimal engagement of trying to capture your thoughts and feelings and put them on paper, I guarantee you this is a life-changing course. It really is. Because the combination of the Buddha's wisdom and insight and then your involvement, you can't help but develop and become happy and bring forth your best self. So that's my guarantee. We can see how we go at the end of the course, but I give you my word. So let's take a moment to set our motivation, shall we, for the course, now that we've kind of heard what we're going to be engaging in. Hopefully your curiosity is piqued and you're quite excited about it. So take a moment to think, wow, we ourselves personally can benefit. But so much more than that, because if we ourselves can bring forward our best self, we can be of infinite benefit to the world. We can be kinder to those that we spend our days with, our family, who we work with, the ones that we are responsible for. Will become useful in our community, whether it's something obvious or whether it's something quite subtle. We are in the world, and what we do in the world affects the world. So we can set our motivation that may we be able to heal the planet, harmonize the elements, look after the environment and all the beings within it. And from a Buddhist point of view, may our intention not stop, not have any limits, but may we be able to develop, and everything that we do today, may it contribute to our own liberation and full enlightenment for the benefit of all. Because if we become enlightened, then perfectly, effortlessly, spontaneously, we'll be able to help all beings in whatever way that they need. So starting from that instinctual yearning for happiness, and then extending with the good heart your motivation for the course without any limit, having the courage to have the biggest, most vast, beautiful motivation, perfect, lasting happiness for oneself and all living beings. And may we be the ones to bring them to it. So let that motivation settle into your mind. And okay, so then let's start with a question of, well, what's happiness? And I think in your notes, there might even actually be, if you've managed to download the notes, where are they? In the worksheets, the first question, your goals for the course, and what does happiness mean to you? So whether you have the notes or not now, just take a moment to think, well, you know, all this talk of happiness, what is happiness? What does it mean? And those of you feeling particularly talkative already, I can see some of your cameras on. Wave at me if you've got an idea. What's your definition of happiness? What is it that makes you happy, or that you think, oh, I'll be happy if or when? Who's there? Who wants to wave at me and give me an answer? Oh, yeah, Barbara, go for it.
Hi, Miffy. For me, I would say happiness is inner peace and contentment.
Yep, inner peace and contentment. Snay, what do you reckon?
Anything I can do, be useful and make somebody happy, make myself do good merits or something in favor of all beings.
Wow, that's super extensive. Fantastic. Who else? Anyone else have this idea, like, you know, I'll be happy when I get a holiday? Or when I get to redo the kitchen? Or when the kitten grows up and stops chewing everything? So, oh, there might be something also in the chat. Oh no, that's the handouts. Right. So luckily the Buddha shared his wisdom and insight about happiness, and actually identified different levels of happiness. And when I heard about this, everything fell into place. It explains so much, because as we'll see, what often happens is that we go for lesser forms of happiness at the expense of lasting happiness without even knowing that's what we're doing. And then, all this effort that we put into our life, and yet happiness is so elusive, then we kind of think, oh, well, maybe I have to give up. Maybe there is no such thing as lasting happiness, and we can easily fall into nihilism. So let's have a look at the 3 types of happiness that the Buddha identified. And as we go through, just think in your mind, well, what ratio of time do I spend on these different levels of happiness? Because it might explain a lot, right? So here's the first level of happiness is actually called lesser happiness. And it's called the lesser happiness of clinging. So if you haven't had breakfast or dinner yet, this may look very delicious. To my mind, at the moment, it looks quite enticing. So why is it called lesser happiness of clinging? It's to do with what we get from the world. So it's a consumable. It's something that's circumstantial. And on one level, it's the happiness that comes in from our senses. So it's dependent on sensual pleasure. Enjoyments from the 5 senses. So food, really enjoying nice food, enjoying the music that you like, being surrounded by nice smells, beautiful perfume, not disgusting ones, rubbish or dead fish or something. And this type of happiness, hedonism, is actually the pinnacle of life for a materialist. If a materialist of what we have is just this life now, then the natural urges, I suppose, that we have is to just get as much sensual pleasure as possible, which is great if you have the resources and the constitution to handle it. You can eat yourself to death, though. You may end up becoming a foodie, for instance. I have some friends that in their 40s and 50s grew up and became foodies. So they had their 50th birthday party. They flew to Thailand with 6 other friends and ate for 2 weeks. And that was their idea of the ultimate. It is something that needs continuous maintenance. It's not like we have our wonderful feast and that's it, I'm done forever. Though finally I did feel like that about vodka. It took a while though. It's something that we need to do again and again. And also it has a few side effects, doesn't it? We know what sugar does to the body. It's like a poison. So what brings us happiness, ironically, also causes us the most misery. Misery, either the side effects of what brings us happiness, or it changes into its opposite. So for many of you, if you've ever had, for instance, a favorite song and you've played it again and again, high rotation, 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, and then suddenly that's it. You cannot handle that song one more time. It's finished forever. What was just so moving has flipped into its opposite, brings us misery. If you've ever had the joy of a new car, so someone said to me, you can relax once you get the first scratch on the car, but up until then it's like worry, 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 get away from my car, get away from my car. So why do these things cause us the most misery? Because they don't last. And not only that, they, with places and cars and food and whatever, if we have negative associations with them, if we have an argument whilst eating cheesecake, we get a negative association and now suddenly we don't like cheesecake anymore. We can't enjoy it. So there is a real paradox there. So that's the first level, the happiness of sensual pleasure. And most of our time is dominated by what comes in through our senses. And we spend a lot of time adjusting our comfort levels. Like even now, I'm sitting on a windy chair, and so I just adjust so that I don't feel uncomfortable. Continuously adjust. But if I couldn't, if I had to sit perfectly still, then after a while, I'd start being in pain. So there's another level of the lesser happiness of clinging, what we get from the world, and that's the mental happiness. So forms of mental stimulation, the enjoyment of good books, the enjoyment of, or the feeling of satisfaction of earning an honest living, of being useful in the world, of having work, the self-esteem that comes from having work, the mental happiness that comes from entertainment, but also interesting books, feeding your curiosity, the mental happiness that comes from raising children, from having a good family life. So why is this called the lesser happiness of clinging? It depends on the conditions. Depends on the conditions being right. So it's highly unstable. And even though we try and control everything, no matter how hard we strive, things really are out of control. We can't control how our children turn out, what kind of influences that they have. Like no one wants their child to grow up a junkie or a bank robber, but a whole lot do. No one wants to get ill, and yet we can think everything is going along fine. And I've had this false sense of security, I suppose, where I thought, well, you know, generally I'm okay. I'm happy enough. But it was all circumstantial, because all it takes is for one thing to change and your happiness is destroyed. For instance, with COVID, the threat of disease or being in lockdown, one circumstantial thing changes and our whole sense of happiness disintegrates. So it really shows that's why it's the lesser happiness of clinging, because it's what we get from the world. It's dependent on how the world treats us. So we are beholden to the world. We're in a state of complete uncertainty. And that in itself is so debilitating. So questions or comments about these two, the happiness from the senses or the mental happiness, the lesser happiness of clinging, you know, it's what we grasp at and cling to. What questions do you have? Questions or comments? I'm going to encourage you to question. It's good to question things.
In Tripitaka, there is two kinds of happiness described, one called Priti in Pali and one called Sukha. What is the difference?
I don't know. I am not studied enough to know about these in Pali, but we are going to talk about the next levels of happiness. So you might be able to recognize them.
Okay.
I'm so sorry about that. Excuse me. Any other questions? No? Okay. So let's go on to the next one then. So the middle level of happiness is called the higher sources of happiness. And this can be described as not what we get, but what we bring to the world, what we contribute. So why have I put a picture of people here dealing with rubbish? Well, this is actually a picture from Brisbane about a decade ago now, where we had these horrendous floods. But it could easily be, you know, cleaning up from Hurricane Katrina. So what we bring to the world, what happened in Brisbane was that the floods and mud and rubbish everywhere, and the council just put out a little text message saying, hey, anyone who wants to help with the cleanup, bring your gloves and your rake and your bucket and show up at this checkpoint. They thought they'd get a couple of hundred people and they got thousands of people showed up to help. So here you have thousands of people purposefully dealing with mud and rubbish and sewage, and it's hot and it's humid, and yet they want to do it. And that's because there is something that is deeper and more satisfying to our sense of well-being and satisfaction and happiness than just the senses, than just how yucky something smells. Because being able to help others is really satisfying, whether we know them or not. So this was an amazing thing that totally underestimated the goodness of human beings to just want to help others, regardless of whether you know them or not, because we feel we're all in the same boat together. So this type of happiness we can think of as renunciation, because what we're renouncing is our preoccupation with comfort, with mundane concerns, with things smelling nice, with being comfortable, with it being a nice temperature, all of those things. We renounce those. We're able to release them because we're going for something deeper and more meaningful, more profound. So that's a really nice way of thinking about renunciation. It's not that, oh, no, you can't have nice things. It's that we actually spontaneously release our clinging to them for something better, something far more satisfying. It's something greater than ourselves. It's more than just me and my needs. And because it's greater than ourselves, the satisfaction is greater. It's called eudemonic happiness. So instead of hedonic on the senses, eudemonic, happiness from within. And sharing our time, our help, our resources actually makes us feel happy, makes us feel much more satisfied. And it's ironic because if we share our stuff, for instance, if we share our dinner, we have less dinner, but we have more satisfaction. If we share our time, we have less time, we're muddier, but we have more happiness. So this type of happiness is deeper than a mood, deeper than an emotional sensation, because we can actually be still going through our own problems in life. We might have some health difficulties, or stubbed our toe, or arthritis, or we might be breaking up with somebody, whatever it is, but we go and do something like this and it's deeper. It's deeper than depression or anxiety. And we can be feeling personally miserable, but we think back to a time like that and can still feel good about it. And it's way gone. So it keeps on actually generating a sense of happiness. Also on this level, the higher sources of happiness, what we bring to the world is a sense of, colloquially, what we could call don't sweat the small stuff. And this is the happiness of letting go. Letting go of what? Letting go of that rumination that we have. When we get, well, I used to say like a cracked record, but who knows what records are these days, right? So we get stuck in a groove and we can't get out of it. Rumination, where we start thinking about how someone harmed us, and then we think about everything else that's wrong with them, and it goes on and on and on. So we let it go. I think there's some kids' movie about this. There's a song, Let It Go. Thankfully, I haven't heard it because it'll probably become an earworm. But I remember when I was little and my mother used to say to me, Miffy, just let it go. And I'd go, I don't know how to do that. How do I let it go? Because I get so intense about everything. I can't just let it go. So how do we do that? So one of the things is to notice when we're ruminating on something, going around and around and getting deeper and deeper into the groove, and actually stopping the rumination. And the best way to stop it is to just change your environment. Change how your physical environment, or if you can't do that, change your mental environment. Thinking of your happy place. It can be that simple to stop it in its tracks. So the letting go and practicing being able to let go, like letting go of that clinging, it's a skill. It's a skill that we can develop. And it's very good to take the pressure off. It doesn't fix the problem, but it takes the pressure off enough that then we have some room to move. We have some space in which we can develop our resilience and develop our skills more. So one of the ways that we can also let go is by recognizing that all of that negativity and obsession, it's just not worth it. So maybe one time, if you're having difficulties with someone or breaking up with somebody and your friend said, you know what, they're not worth it. They're not worth getting so upset over. It's not worth spending all of your energy and ruining your mental equilibrium by thinking how horrible they are. And you get to a stage where you go, yep, it's not worth it, and you put it aside. So that's a skill of letting go, because on balance, yeah, even if you're right and they're wrong, thinking like that just makes us unhappy. So we let it go. That's one very effective way of doing it for our own peace of mind. So to not sweat the small stuff also means to, in the scheme of things, notice what really matters to you. What is it that matters? Because many times we get stuck on a whole lot of negative details, and we look back on the day and we've just been distracted. How much time have we focused on what we say matters, our values? You know, we say we support the family, be a good person, this and that. But what percentage of our time have we spent doing that? And what percentage of our time have we spent looking at what's wrong with things? So this is a way of just readjusting things to be in line, aligned with what we say matters. And most of the time, that's how we start off. We say, this is what matters to me. And then very quickly, we might see there is no way that is reflected in our life. It's just words. So how do we start bringing that into reality, reflecting it in our life? By asking ourselves, in the scheme of things, does this really matter? You know, in a year, will this matter? Even in a week, will this matter? And the last one of this is that can help us to let go. Stop worrying about what other people think about us. This is a hard one, isn't it? So we kind of have to pick which opinions matter to us. And I think because our focus is so drawn outwards by our senses, by just having pleasant relationships, that then we become dependent on our sense of well-being from how others perceive us. We become like junkies to that. And very soon we will start going against our own values or our own passions and interests because we want the approval of others, or we don't want the disapproval. And so we stop being authentic people. We try and change ourselves to please our parents, or, I mean, you know, I've got bright hair, right? So every now and again, I'll come across a little old lady at the bus stop, and inevitably the little old lady on her walking frame would say, oh, I wish I could have hair like that, but my children would never forgive me. So, like, you know, while we continue to live our life to please others like that, beholden like that, where there's a discrepancy. So this was actually one of the things you've no doubt heard about, you know, the 5 regrets of dying people. And of those 5 top regrets, one of them was to really regretting at the end of your life not living an authentic life. In particular, examples like hiding that you're gay or lesbian from your family, and so living that discrepancy there, and then coming to the end of life and realizing, you know what, it would have been much better to just come out with it and be able to be myself, because hiding like that is so destructive. So this how we can start working towards this authentic life is, number one, by stop worrying what other people think about you, because it's just what they think about you. It doesn't change you either way. So I've been really fortunate in this, because I started kind of dressing outlandishly in high school, and Brisbane in those days was a pretty redneck place. And so on my way from home to school, people would throw things at me out of cars. Cars would do a U-turn and come back the other way on the street to throw their Coke cans at me. People would yell at me. It was kind of in the era of punk, and any woman that had brightly colored hair was seen as an affront. How very dare they? So very quickly I learned to not base my self-worth on what others thought of me, and that was like my boot camp. So actually that kind of difficulty set me in really good stead, because now I do feel what other people think of me, but I don't let it push me around. So yeah, my pride and ego gets hurt, but I don't let that push me off course. It's just an emotional sensation. It comes and it goes. And so there's a real freedom in that. Oh, so questions or comments about this, about not sweating the small stuff. It's getting a little bit more trickier. So anything at all? I'm looking at the faces. No one's waving at me. Does that mean it's clear? Good. Okay. Good. That's a good sign. Right. Well, onwards then for the next one. So also on this level of higher sources of happiness. So it's not the peak yet, but also on this level, what we bring to the world is states of deep concentration. And this is the pinnacle of, I suppose, a secular world. So if you're not on a spiritual path, this kind of state of deep concentration and the kind of blissful state of mind that comes along with it. It can be also the pinnacle of, if you're a skilled athlete or a musician, if you're a skilled mathematician or scientist, if you're a skilled meditator, if you're a skilled short order cook, tennis player. It's when we are 100% involved in the activity and we have some form of mastery over it. So we're not scratching our head going, oh, what do we do here? But we are one with the activity. Our concentration is perfect. We're not distracted by if we're uncomfortable or hot or cold or anything like that. We think about it as being in the zone, as being in a state of grace. I've read some books on marathon runners where they say, you know, that the first bit you're going along fine, then fatigue begins to set in and it becomes really hard and you hit the wall. And then you push on through that, and then you're in the zone after that. You are one with the activity. So this really interesting thing happens because we are one with the activity. The sense of self, of me and mine and grasping and separate from the world that makes us feel alienated that dissolves, it falls away because we are one with the activity. So there's this blissful spaciousness in our heart. And so even though there is some effort to get there, when we're in this state of deep concentration, it is blissful. Great painters, like I remember seeing a documentary on Jackson Pollock, and the state of bliss that he was in when he was painting, being in the zone, you know, and hours go by and it's just like seconds. So there is a whole range of ways that we can get to this, but it pretty much depends on having achieved mastery of what we're doing, so that we are one with the activity. We're not just learners. And there is no sorrow in these states. They feel transcendent and timeless. And like I said, it's pinnacle of a non-religious path. It's kind of as high as we can get. And it can be the pinnacle of many religious paths as well. So why isn't this called the highest form of happiness? And you might have kind of guessed by now, but there is one drawback, not in this type of concentration, but that eventually we must emerge at some stage. Eventually you're going to have to get up and go to the loo. Eventually you're going to have to eat something. And so that state of concentration will come to an end. So it is not sustainable forever. It's something that comes and goes. And again, it can be circumstantial, because if it is dependent on the senses, like being a painter or a runner or a mathematician, and our senses change, we don't have the knees anymore, or we get dementia, or we lose our job. If that concentration was dependent on these external activities, then what are we going to do? So this is something that happens to a lot of great athletes. So we're seeing, you know, at the Olympics at the moment, such a rarefied existence, so intense, you know, living a life of a renunciate, devoted to whatever these activities are, then the incredible joy that comes of doing a perfect performance, doing your personal best, and then the added joy of winning the medal. And then what? So what happens with so many athletes once they've won their gold and reached their prime and tipped over the hill? Then it's a huge come down, and they know they'll never be as good again in their life, ever. It's over. And many elite athletes end up committing suicide because they feel that their happiness is dependent on these external activities. And now if I can no longer do these, I will never be happy. So I think the athletes that make it through are the ones that realize that the medal only lasts for a little while until someone else beats your personal best and gets the gold medal next. And now your gold medal, who even remembers? You know, your granny. That's about it. Maybe the kids you went to school with, but it's forgotten very, very quickly. So the only thing that lasts from this is our personal transformation, our emotional transformation. So what we go through in the process of developing. So the athletes that don't end up committing suicide, that do make a life for themselves afterwards, are often the ones that then become coaches and start giving back to the world. So again, it comes back to what we bring to the world to be able to offer to others. Great dancers end up becoming choreographers and, you know, whatever you call it, dancing coaches. And then that way, because of that, being able to share your insight and your emotional transformation, then some happiness can come. Are there any questions or comments? Just checking. Okay. Well, let's have a look then. So we've looked at the lower happiness, the lesser happiness of clinging, that bondage happiness that predominates, that most of our time is spent adjusting, coming in from the senses. Then we've looked at the middle, the higher forms of happiness that come from contributing to the world, that are much deeper than a mood or a sensation, much more sustainable. But now there's something more. So this is actually what's called the highest form of happiness. And it has this wonderful long name, the bliss of the stages of enlightenment. So this is something, I'm not sure if it is unique to the Buddhist understanding, what the Buddha identified, but it can be summed up as what we become, how we change, that inner transformation. And positive psychology would sum it up as an optimal state of flourishing. What this is, being progressively less bound by disturbing emotions, we feel greater peace and freedom. It's not dependent on external circumstances. And as we can see, our attachment to outer pleasures is what distracts us from this one, from this optimal state of flourishing. So we can see that, like, for instance, with the elite athletes, if you actually start being able to share your wisdom, your experience, now that's something that comes from within. Whether you can physically do the sport anymore doesn't matter so much. So this optimal state of flourishing, it's something that cannot be lost, which is why it's called the bliss of the stages to enlightenment, because it is a blissful feeling of equilibrium and peace within our mind that is there, and it's not circumstantial. It can't be lost. So just like, for instance, once we've learned to read, we're not going to forget how to read. It's a realization that we have. We've put the effort into read, we've internalized it, and now it's a skill, it's a realization, and we know how to read. As we develop our emotional resilience, our emotional skills, and our thinking skills, that also becomes a skill. It becomes internalized, and it's not something we can forget how to do. So it's a progressive development. To be able to develop like this, it's based on ethics, on pure ethics. It can't be based on an unstable thing of ripping people off or somehow cheating, because we'll never feel quite right within ourselves if it is. It's also based on a recognition of the interdependence of all living beings, how we are involved with the world and the people around us, how we're part of a collective. Who we are does depend on others. We're intimately linked like that. So we're not just a person by ourselves alienated. Suddenly we are part of the world and we have a place in it. So if we develop our resilience, our emotional skills, we can share our experience, all of those hard-won realizations that we've come to. You can imagine that day by day we are developing as human beings, and day by day we are lessening our faults. We're whittling away our negativities, our short-temperedness, our cheating or our laziness. And if we keep on going, whittling away the negativities and developing all of our potential, eventually we'll have no negativities and we'll have developed all of our wisdom and compassion and intelligence and good-heartedness to its ultimate extent. And that's what Buddhahood is. That's what enlightenment is. It's a state of ultimate lasting happiness. Why? Because we've removed all of the negativities until they are no longer there. No negativities, no suffering, free forever. And we've developed all of our qualities. So we've developed all the ways that we can help others. And that's what brings the most happiness. We've developed all of our skills so that we have effortless mastery over everything. We don't have to think about it anymore. To their ultimate, that's enlightenment. So enlightenment's not some kind of abracadabra thing. It's not something that people only did in the olden days, or only Asian people can do, or only guys can do. It's a natural result. And that's why it's called the highest form of happiness, because it is what we become, and it's not dependent, it's not beholden to circumstances. It's not unstable like that. It's very stable and cannot be lost because it comes from within. So the kind of day-to-day experience of this, why it's called the stages of enlightenment, it's not that we have to wait till it happens, but we can start experiencing this, and we do straight away, because in this process, we have an inner freedom. Why? Because we're not depending on our circumstances being perfect. So that's what resilience is being able to be emotionally open and stable and happy in the face of adversity. Even when things go wrong, it doesn't rock your world. So that's what we're all aiming for, isn't it? And yet how we go about it isn't by developing these inner skills. It's by trying to get all of that nice, comfortable, pleasant lifestyle. So you can see where we've gone wrong. Or at least I can see where I've gone wrong. You've probably gone way, way better than me. And hopefully you can also see how our distraction or preoccupation with those lesser states of happiness actually rips us off. It distracts us from these higher states of happiness. So in a way, we destroy our potential for happiness because we're going about it in a back to front way. So questions, comments about this? Have I put the case well? Snehashi, did that correlate with your understanding of the Pali?
You did very well, fantastic, and it was very, from all the points of view, I was really, very, very happy. And if I understood, if you allow me, of course, conditional versus non-conditional or unconditional means when I got like an unconditional love versus conditional love. When I become in a state of conditional love, I get also happiness. But when I became in a state unconditional love, I'm also get happiness. But when I got unconditional love, that's a stage of enlightenment. I'm very thankful to you. Bye.
Yes, actually, but unconditional love it is a stage of enlightenment. So it's something that we can develop straight away. We don't have to kind of wait till we're enlightened.
Right.
And we can see logically why unconditional love lasts, why it is a deeper form of love, because generally our conditional love is determined by how much happiness we get back. That's a condition. It's transactional, isn't it? So we have a nice friendship with somebody, we enjoy being with them. Then, you know, they go through a rough patch, they're really depressed or something, and we don't like them anymore. They're a real downer, so we don't want to stay with them. So then our sense of warmth and care towards them diminishes. So that's, most of our relationships are like that. They are transactional, conditional. They're dependent on us enjoying the relationship. Then we find ourselves in relationships that we cannot escape, that we can't ditch when they're no longer fun, like family and work, you know. And so then it's kind of in our best interest to figure out, well, how do we go along here? And so then if we do actually care for our family or our workmates, it becomes unconditional because it's not dependent on whether they bring me happiness or not. It's not dependent on my own emotional state of being. And I've actually personally, I've found we can do this with our pets. That's our starting point for it. And then possibly we can start doing it with our family and workmates. But with our pets, you know, we love our pets, our cat or our dog, and then so they get sick and we've got to give them pills. If you've ever tried to give your cat or your dog a pill, you know, it can be quite, you might get bitten and they hate you and they spit it out the side and whatever. So we don't just go, oh, well, you're no pet of mine. I don't like you anymore because you bit me. We still love them. And why? Because we know they can't help it. And we care for them whether they hate us or love us. We care for them whether they bite us or not. So it's a little bit, it's a more kind of pure relationship, I suppose. And if we're lucky, we can get like that with our human relationships too. You know, and often it's because we've had to spend the ups and downs with people. And so then, yeah, we might be going through a really rough patch with someone, but we remember that we love them, that we care about them, that we want the best for them, and we want them to be happy, even if they're making my life a misery. So if you've ever lived with someone who's suffering depression, for instance, it's as bad as having depression yourself. It's really debilitating. And so the way through we can see is to release that clinging to a comfortable family life of just wanting a nice, pleasant time, because that's that happiness of clinging. So if we can release that by remembering, oh, I really care about this person. I really wish they were happy. I may not be able to contribute to their happiness, but I still have that wish for them. And then we kind of go into a deeper gear. And so our love for them is no longer conditional. It's not conditional on us being comfortable. And it's much more sustainable that way. And our heart is much more stable that way. So then from a Buddhist point of view, we take that and we turn it into great loving kindness, great compassion, which is not just for our family, but then it's for everybody. So the greater our care for others and the wish for others to be happy, the greater our happiness. It's exponential. So there's very strong logic to this. It's not just, oh, it would be nice to have a nice world and it's nice to be nice to other people, but when push comes to shove, I'm going to look after myself. That's not actually how it works. Understanding these levels of happiness and what the causes of that happiness are is like the proof of why altruism is so important. It's the proof of why being kind to others is so important, because of the cause and effect, how it plays out. It's not just a nice to have. We can see how it's really crucial for our own happiness and the well-being of the world. Okay, so questions, comments? Who else has a question for me? Oh yeah, how do you say your name?
You can call me Priya.
Priya, radio.
Yeah. Okay. It's hard to pronounce. I would like to make a jokes. As a Buddhist, I say myself, the Buddhists are the most selfish one because Buddhists try to give up the self, ego. So
Yep.
we
Yep.
are the most selfish because we are trying to get away the self, ego.
Yeah, that's like His Holiness saying about intelligent selfishness, isn't it? Yeah. Though, jokes are just lost on me, I'm afraid. People have to explain them. And then like 6 months later, I'll go, oh, I get it. What else? So I have this book here. I'm not sure if you can see Matthew Ricard, and it's a book called Happiness. So a guide to developing life's most important skill. So it's a hint right there, isn't it? That happiness isn't just something that happens to us. It's not something that we just wait to happen, like waiting for Godot. It's something that it's a skill that we can develop. And this is great news, isn't it? We can grow our own happiness. So this is what Matthew Ricard says, and he is the monk that has been proven to be the happiest person in the world. How do we know? Because they stuck the MRI thingies on him and stuck him through the machine and saw all the neuro whatever's shooting around there in his brain, and that proved it. So from a Western point of view, we kind of need this third-party machine to tell us what we can patently see. And he has this really wonderful way of bridging East and West of, he's a modern day scientist, and also the Buddhist psychology, this really deep insight into the workings of the mind. So he talks about happiness, different types of happiness. And so he says, by happiness here, and this happiness of what we become, the bliss of the stages of enlightenment. By happiness, I mean here a deep sense of flourishing that arises from an exceptionally healthy mind. This is not a mere pleasurable feeling, a fleeting emotion, or a mood, but it's an optimal state of being. Happiness is also a way of interpreting the world, since while it might be difficult to change the world, it is always possible to change the way that we look at it. He also goes on to say that when we're thinking about those middle levels of happiness or peace, what we bring to the world, he'll say that the common factor of all of these experiences would seem to be the momentary disappearance of inner conflicts. And that's often how we think of happiness, is when the problems have subsided, the conflicts are gone. And so then the person feels in harmony with the world and with themselves. Someone enjoying such an experience, such as walking through a serene wilderness, meditating, has no particular expectations beyond the simple act. They are simply here and now, free and open. And for just a few moments, thoughts of the past are suppressed. The mind is not burdened with plans for the future, and the present moment is liberated from all mental constructs. This moment of respite, from which all sense of emotional urgency has vanished, is experienced as one of profound peace. For someone who's achieved a goal, completed a task, or won a victory, the tension they have long carried with them relaxes, and the ensuing sense of release is felt as a deep calm, free of all expectation and fear. So we can relate to those levels of happiness, this kind of middle level, the higher forms of happiness. They can be quite profound. They may only happen to us once or twice in our life so far. Or we've read about them or seen them on the movies or seen the athletes at the Olympics. But he goes on to say, But this experience is just a passing glimpse brought on by a particular set of circumstances. We call it a magic moment, a state of grace. Yet the difference between these flashes of happiness seized on the fly and the immutable peacefulness of the Buddha, for instance, is as great as that between the tiny section of sky seen through the eye of a needle and the limitless expanses of outer space. The two conditions differ in dimension, duration, and depth. So that's really something to keep in mind, that what we feel as an incredibly profound, life-changing experience is like the sky seen through the eye of a needle. It's just this flash, this glimpse. And if we remove the boundaries of that needle and look at the sky, the limitless expanse of the sky, that's what the bliss on the stages of enlightenment is. That's the bliss of enlightenment. It's huge. It's almost incomprehensible, but it is something that is a natural result. We can naturally put in place the causes for this and naturally achieve the result. I think, just as an aside, actually, that, this is why we need experiences like having a tantric initiation, or having a, incredible book that changes our life, or a movie that changes our life, or an experience that changes our life. We really need that taste. We need that taste of something far bigger than what we've already experienced. And once we have that initial experience, then we know it's possible, and then we can quite happily put in all of the work and effort that we need to actually achieve it. So that's why it's important to do your homework, to do the reflections, so that we get this experience, because no good just hearing about it. We've got to experience it for ourselves and see what is possible, and then we've got the energy to continue. Okay, questions, comments? I don't know if you have this saying in America, but in Australia we say, oh, you've talked your ear off. So maybe I've talked your ear off. So, at the beginning of the class, we talked about, well, what is happiness? What do we think happiness is? That thought, I'd be happy when, or I'd be happy if this happened, or when that happens. So has your idea of happiness changed from the beginning of the class to now? Anything to add or to change? No? Anything that we might have missed out in the beginning that we've added in now? Hopefully there's a change.
Well, I guess it's it just really affected me when you were talking about, and I don't remember your exact words, but basically about being externally referred, like letting how will do affect how I behave or how I think of myself. And I lost my job a few years ago, a job I'd had for decades, and since then, when you mentioned that, I really realized I've had the disease of comparison, that I've been comparing myself to others, that I'm not good enough since I lost that job.
Yeah. So, that's a good way to put it, Mary, the disease of comparison. I really like that, because that's what it is. It's like an addiction and a disease. And we'll never win that game. and like I remember also in my teenage years, I had this horrible job at a pub. I was waitressing at a pub. I think just about every job I've had has been illegal. This one, it was a legal job, but I was underage, but because I was tall, I got the job. Anyway, so I was waitressing in the pub, and I was actually sacked from that job. So I hated the job. I worked there for I don't know how long. I just wanted to quit every single time. I'd have to drag myself to work. And then one day they saw me walking home from school in my school uniform, and I was busted. It was like, you can't work here. You're still a schoolgirl. So I got the sack. And then I was devastated. I'm like, what's going on? I hate the job. I wanted to quit and I got the sack. I should be happy. I even get severance. Like, why am I so upset? And it was just a blinding revelation. It's because my self-worth was based on this job, what other people thought of me. Which, while it's working in the short term, it's fine, but don't we have that niggling anxiety underneath? Because there's always a threat. There's always a threat somebody else will be promoted before us. There's a threat that we'll lose our job, or we do lose the job. We wanted to be rid of it anyway, but it still hits us as a demotion, as a rejection. So that's actually nothing to do with the job. That's because we've based our self-worth on these external things, what we get from the world. So that's why that lesser happiness of clinging, there's the ones from the senses to do with comfort and physical pleasant experiences, but there's also the mental one of the nice family life or the having a job. So it's a mental or emotional experience, but it is dependent on circumstances. And if we live long enough, which let's all hope that we do, all of our circumstances will change. We will lose those circumstances. We'll lose our friends, we'll lose our family, we'll lose our job, our health, our la, 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 la. And what is left? So what's left is what's within our heart. It's what we can share with the world. It also, Mary reminds me, a while ago, there was a world famous scientist, and he had some degenerative disease. So he ended up being in a wheelchair, and he had this huge fight to go over to Switzerland and end his life because he could not bear being dependent on others. And I got really upset with this story because I just thought, how amazingly selfish, he's a world famous scientist. He could be tutoring and mentoring a whole lot of young scientists coming up that would just want to be asking him question after question. But because he didn't like being in a wheelchair, and because he felt beholden to others, and because he didn't have the independence that his sense of worth relied on, he wanted to end his life. And he did. I mean, that's a real tragedy. It's a tragedy for him. It's a tragedy for all the young scientists coming up. It's a tragedy for the world. So why someone as intelligent as that could get it so wrong? Because all the time, if our worth is even just based on something as amazing as being one of the world's best scientists, but if it's based on an external thing, what we get from the world, then we are beholden to it. And he didn't want to be beholden to it. Okay, so I have a little thing to finish up. So this is a book called Happier by Tal Ben-Shahar, who's an Israeli guy. Tal Ben-Shahar. It's a New York Times bestseller. Can you learn to be happy? So I got this book at one of the happiness conferences. It used to happen back in the day when people used to congregate with each other. So he had this really nice way of talking about happiness perception, what we perceive as happiness. And he's got a nice secular way of summing things up. Happiness perception is about recognizing that happiness is the ultimate currency. It's the end to which all other goals lead. Happiness perception is not about rejecting the material, but rather dethroning it from its status as the highest on the hierarchy. Aristotle understood this when he wrote that happiness is the meaning and purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. As did the Dalai Lama, who asserted that whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, the very purpose of our life is happiness. The very motion of our life is towards happiness. So the currency through which we take stock of our life, our perception of what matters, has wide-reaching consequences for our personal lives and for society as a whole. We enjoy higher levels of well-being when we recognize and internalize the fact that happiness is the ultimate currency. So that's why it's worth looking at these levels of happiness and actually start going, is the motion towards happiness or just towards pleasure, comfort, entertainment? Or is it towards happiness, a happy state of mind? Happiness perception is about asking the questions, what will make me happier? It's about finding the overlap between what gives me meaning, what gives me pleasure, what are my strengths? It's about asking, what's my calling? And identifying the things that you really, really want to do at school, at work, and with your life. With these questions comes a much higher likelihood that you will find the ultimate currency, happiness. So with those questions, that will lead us into our homework for the day. So we've talked about the bliss of the stages to enlightenment, the 3 types of happiness identified by the Buddha, the lesser forms, how they distract us. Nothing wrong with them, not being judgmental, but they distract us. Lasting happiness comes from within, and we start accessing it by what we contribute, what we bring to the world. And it becomes us. We change, we transform. And that kind of happiness comes from within. And from a Buddhist point of view, that goes from life to life. We carry our realizations with us. Yeah, we carry all of our emotional baggage, but we carry our capacity for happiness, our realizations. So the homework, finish those self-reflection sheets. They're in the notes. What happiness means to you. If you've got anything to add or change for your definition so that it becomes more holistic. There's a couple of questions in there about in the spirit of a child who constantly asks why, but why, mummy? but why? Ask yourself, the things that you think make you happy or that you want, ask why, and ask why 3 times. Until you start getting down to what Tal Ben-Shahar called the ultimate currency, until you get down to happiness. I want to go on a holiday because I want to relax. Well, why? Why do you want to relax? What's the point of relaxing? Oh, because I want to make something of my life. Well, why? Because there are people that I care about, and there are people I don't know who I care about, and there's the world I care about. And now suddenly you've got the workings to a much more profound reason. So that's one. And the other, the gratitude journal to do each morning. So with the gratitude journal or a happiness journal, it's actually, I think in the notes called the happiness journal, each day you've got to write down 5 things that make you happy. So try and do 5 different things and try and have them from each of the 3 levels of happiness. So you can have really mundane things like, well, what makes me happy? Patting the cat. That always makes me happy. Pretty much cheesecake makes me happy. Okay, so that's the lesser happiness of clinging. After 1 or 2 cheesecakes, it doesn't make me happy anymore. So the other things that makes me happy, well, leading a class makes me happy. It used to make me terrified, but now it makes me happy. Doing something, cooking for somebody. So not the cooking necessarily, but the being able to offer your time, all the love that goes into it. And something else that could make you happy might be the epic battle that you have to not retaliate. And at the end of the day, you go, I didn't bust out. I didn't retaliate. So it actually might have been a very uncomfortable experience, but within, it's had a profound effect. So the not so obvious things that make us happy, that inner development. So try for each day, put down 5 things that make you happy from those levels of happiness. Why it's so worth doing this, there's been some really amazing studies done of people, how they self-report as being happy. And I remember one where they, in amongst the war, the siege of Sarajevo, and they found that there were people in Sarajevo that were happy, even with the siege and the famine. And why? Because they woke up every morning feeling lucky. Lucky they're alive, lucky the cat is still there, lucky their building is still standing. So what actually determines whether we feel happy or not isn't what is happening to us. You can be in the middle of a siege. What was it, 12 years or something in Sarajevo? You know, you can be in the middle of a siege, of a war, and be happy. Or you can be in a mansion with heaps of money and be miserable. So what's the defining thing? It's waking up in the morning feeling lucky. So how many of us do that as a habit? So this happiness journal is a way of creating a happy habit so that we recognize all the amazing circumstances that we have, and we just start jumping for joy, recognizing how lucky we are. So this, folks, it's free happiness. You don't have to buy it. You don't even have to change anything in your life. You just have to do your homework. So I really, really hope that you do your homework, that you know, because I gave you a guarantee. And then next week, hopefully I can hear a little bit how you went with that happiness journal. And next week, we're going to continue with how not to get distracted. So here we are, we've discovered what matters to us and how to, you know, go forward in our life and be authentic. Now, why do we get distracted? What happens? Why do we fall off the wagon? So we'll look at those worldly concerns and how to keep our head above water, how to keep sight of our goals, more on that kind of not sweating the small stuff, and how to combat things like doubt, second guessing ourselves, the inner saboteurs that psychologically come up and make our course through life quite windy and wobbly. So thank you so much for your attention. My extreme huge apologies for those people that came along what would have been on time but was an hour late because of my stuff up with the time. We will get you the recording so you can catch up, and I'll change the times online. And meanwhile, stay safe, cultivate your happiness, enjoy developing this wonderful skill, and see you next week.